It wasn't during the fight. It was after, when everything had settled into that particular kind of silence that makes lies impossible. Marcus straightened his leather jacket with deliberate care, the same jacket she'd bought him for his birthday 6 months ago. He reached for his keys on the entry table, the small ceramic dish they'd picked out together at that vintage market, now holding only his things, never theirs again. The metal clinked against porcelain with a finality that seemed to echo through the entire apartment. Then he paused, one hand on the doorknob, and turned back with something that wasn't quite a smile, but carried all the cruelty of one. "You'll see," he said, his voice carrying the casual certainty of someone stating a weather forecast. "Nobody's going to want you." He didn't shout it, didn't spit the words with anger. That might have been easier to dismiss, easier to categorize as temporary rage that would fade with time. Instead, he delivered it like advice from someone who genuinely believed they were doing her a favor by preparing her for an inevitable truth. The door closed with a soft click, not a slam. Somehow that made it worse. Vanessa stood in the center of her living room, her living room now, not theirs, and felt the words settle over her skin like frost. The apartment suddenly seemed too large and too small simultaneously. The couch where they'd watched countless movies together. The kitchen where they'd argued about his mother's boundary issues. The bedroom where she'd believed, foolishly perhaps, that she knew what love looked like. All of it now contaminated by those 7 words. "Nobody's going to want you." She didn't cry. Not then. She moved through the apartment with mechanical precision, collecting the last traces of him. A phone charger behind the nightstand, a forgotten gym bag in the hall closet, a half-empty bottle of his cologne in the bathroom that still carried his scent. Everything went into a box that she sealed with packing tape, the sound harsh and satisfying in the silence. The following days dissolved into a blur of necessary functions. She woke up. She went to work at the marketing firm where she'd recently made junior partner. She smiled at colleagues' questions about her weekend with practiced vagueness. She ate lunch at her desk, reviewing campaign proposals with the same focused attention she'd always brought to her work. She came home. She watched television without processing what she was seeing. She slept, or tried to, because the words always came back at night. "Nobody's going to want you." They arrived in that vulnerable space between waking and sleeping, when her defenses were down and her mind was too tired to fight them off. She'd find herself analyzing the statement from every angle. Was it her career focus that made her unwantable? The fact that she'd chosen partnership meetings over some of his friends' parties? Her insistence on maintaining her own interests, her own friends, her own identity separate from being half of Marcus and Vanessa? Or was it simpler than that? Was there something fundamentally wrong with her that he'd seen, and she'd been too blind to notice? She didn't post cryptic quotes on social media, didn't change her relationship status with any dramatic announcement, didn't drunk text him at 2 a.m. or drive past his new apartment to see if his car was there. She maintained her dignity with the same quiet determination she brought to everything else in her life. But the words were there, always there, waiting in the dark. 3 weeks after he left, an envelope arrived at her office. Thick, cream-colored cardstock with elegant calligraphy. The kind of invitation that spoke of old money and established institutions. The annual Harrison Foundation Gala. An evening of philanthropy and partnership. Cocktail reception at 7 p.m. Black tie optional. Vanessa stared at the invitation, turning it over in her hands. The Harrison Foundation supported educational initiatives for underprivileged youth, a cause her firm had partnered with on several pro bono marketing campaigns. She'd worked directly with their communications director on the spring fundraiser, staying late to perfect the messaging, ensure every dollar of their limited budget went toward maximum impact. This was the reward for that work, an invitation to their premier annual event, where major donors mingled with corporate sponsors and nonprofit leaders. The kind of networking opportunity that could open doors, create connections, advance her career in tangible ways. She almost declined. The thought of putting on a formal dress, of making small talk with strangers, of being alone at an event designed for couples and colleagues seemed exhausting. Easier to send a polite regret, make a modest donation, and spend the evening at home with Netflix and the Thai takeout place that knew her order by heart now. Her finger hovered over her phone, ready to type the gracious decline. Then she stopped. Nobody's going to want you. She set the invitation on her desk, propped against her computer monitor where she could see it. For 2 days she walked past it, considering. The voice of doubt whispered all the reasons to stay home. But there was another voice too, quieter but growing stronger. The voice that remembered who she'd been before Marcus. The woman who'd graduated top of her class, who'd landed a competitive position at one of the city's premier marketing firms, who'd built a career through talent and determination rather than connections or luck. The woman who'd never needed someone else to validate her worth. That woman wouldn't hide at home because of 7 poisonous words. On the morning of the gala, Vanessa sent her RSVP, attending, party of 1. Part 2, the woman in the mirror. The day of the gala arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that seemed designed for transitions. Vanessa left work early, something she rarely allowed herself, and drove home through streets painted gold with late afternoon sun. She'd bought the dress 3 days earlier, after work, at a boutique she usually walked past because the window displays screamed prices she'd rather put toward her retirement fund. But this time she'd stopped, drawn by a floor-length gown in deep emerald green that seemed to shimmer between darkness and light depending on the angle. Just looking, she'd told the sales associate, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and an accent that suggested Eastern Europe. That one, the woman had said, pointing directly at the green dress. That one is waiting for you. Vanessa had laughed. I don't even know if it's in my size. Try it. If it doesn't fit, you leave. If it fits, the woman had shrugged with the wisdom of someone who dressed thousands of women for thousands of occasions. Then it was waiting. It had fit perfectly. More than perfectly. It had transformed her reflection into someone she recognized from years ago, before compromise had become her default setting. The neckline was elegant without being revealing, the fabric skimming her figure in a way that suggested confidence rather than desperate appeal. She'd tried to calculate whether she could justify the expense, running numbers in her head. How much do you think you're worth? The sales associate had asked quietly. Vanessa had looked at her, startled by the directness of the question. Not what you earn, not what someone else decides you're worth. How much do you think you're worth? She'd bought the dress. Now, standing in her bathroom with her hair loose around her shoulders and her makeup carefully applied, enough to enhance, not enough to hide, Vanessa slipped the dress over her head and watched it settle into place like it had been designed specifically for her body. She studied her reflection with critical honesty. At 32, she saw the faint lines beginning at the corners of her eyes, from years of focusing on computer screens and squinting at campaign mock-ups. Her body was neither model thin nor voluptuous, just her own. She'd never been the prettiest woman in any room, never turned heads with the kind of beauty that made strangers stare. But tonight, in this dress, with her shoulders back and her chin lifted, she looked like someone who'd earned her place in any room she chose to enter. She kept her jewelry simple, small diamond studs that had been her grandmother's, a delicate gold bracelet she'd bought herself when she made partner. No statement pieces. No armor disguised as accessories. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, her closest friend since college. You're going tonight, right? Don't chicken out. You've got this. Vanessa smiled and typed back, leaving in 20 minutes. Thanks for the pep talk yesterday. You didn't need it, but you're welcome. Knock 'em dead. Or at least have one good conversation and some free champagne. 23 minutes later, Vanessa pulled up to the valet stand outside the Grand Meridian Hotel, a historic building downtown that had hosted presidents and celebrities, and apparently annual charity galas that attracted the city's social elite. She handed her keys to the valet, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, who smiled at her with uncomplicated friendliness, and walked through the gilt doors into a lobby that smelled of expensive flowers and older money. The gala was being held in the ballroom on the 3rd floor. Vanessa followed the discreet signs and the sound of string quartet music floating down the marble staircase. She could have taken the elevator, but she wanted these few minutes to prepare herself, to settle into the role of confident professional attending a work-adjacent social function. At the entrance to the ballroom, a young woman with a tablet checked her name against the guest list and handed her a program. "Welcome, Ms. Chen. The cocktail reception is ongoing, and dinner will be served at 8. Please enjoy your evening." Vanessa stepped through the doorway and into a space that took her breath away despite herself. The ballroom was all soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled in. Round tables dressed in ivory linens were scattered throughout, each decorated with centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus. At one end of the room, a small stage held the string quartet, their music providing an elegant backdrop to the murmur of conversation. And everywhere, people. Couples mostly, but also clusters of colleagues, groups of friends, donors holding court with foundation staff. Everyone dressed in their finest, everyone playing their part in this carefully choreographed evening of generosity and social positioning. Vanessa accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and moved toward the perimeter of the room, observing. This was her professional skill, after all. Reading a room, understanding the dynamics, finding the angle that would make a message resonate. She spotted a few people she recognized. The Foundation's executive director holding court near the stage, the communications director she'd worked with deep in conversation with an older couple who had the look of major donors. Several colleagues from her firm clustered near the bar. She could join them. Should, probably. But something made her hesitate. "Nobody's going to want you." The words surfaced unbidden, and she physically shook her head as if to dislodge them. No, she wasn't here to prove anything to Marcus or to anyone else. She was here because she'd been invited, because she'd earned the invitation through good work, and because she'd decided that hiding at home would be letting him win in a game she'd never agreed to play. "The view is better from over there." Vanessa turned to find a man standing a few feet away, gesturing toward the windows with his own champagne glass. He was tall, probably early 40s, with dark hair just beginning to gray at the temples and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His tuxedo fit him with the kind of casual perfection that suggested either old money or a very good tailor, possibly both. "The view?" she asked. "Of the city," he clarified, moving to stand beside her but maintaining a respectful distance. "The sunset's not quite finished. Worth watching, if you have a moment before the speeches start." It was an invitation without pressure, an observation without expectation. Vanessa found herself walking with him toward the windows, drawn by something in his tone that suggested genuine interest in the sunset rather than a practiced pickup line. They stood side by side, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The city spread out below them like a jeweled tapestry. Neither of them spoke, and the silence was comfortable rather than awkward. "I'm Daniel," he said finally, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the automatic lights in the ballroom brightened to compensate. "Daniel Morrison." "Vanessa Chen," she replied, shaking his extended hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, warm but not presumptuous. "First time at the Harrison Gala? Is it that obvious?" He laughed, a genuine sound that made the corners of his eyes crinkle deeper. "Not at all. I've just been coming to these for years, and I've gotten good at recognizing the fellow observers versus the social butterflies." He gestured toward a woman across the room who was moving from group to group with practiced efficiency, collecting air kisses and promising lunch dates. "People like Margaret over there have turned networking into an Olympic sport." "And which are you?" Vanessa asked. "Observer or butterfly?" "Depends on the year," Daniel admitted. "Tonight? Observer. I'm between major projects and not in acquisition mode, so I can actually enjoy the evening instead of working it." "Acquisition mode?" "I'm in venture capital, early-stage tech companies mostly. These events are usually prime hunting grounds for connections and deals. But every once in a while it's nice to just appreciate the cause and the company without an agenda." Vanessa nodded, understanding the dynamic. "I'm in marketing. I worked with the foundation on their spring campaign. This is the thank you invite, I think. The Youth Education Initiative campaign, with the scholarship stories?" Daniel's interest seemed to sharpen. "That was exceptional work. The photography alone, but the way you wove the individual narratives into the broader mission statement. That was the campaign that got my firm to triple our annual contribution. Vanessa felt warmth spread through her chest. That had nothing to do with the champagne. You mean that? Completely. I'm on the Foundation's advisory board, full disclosure. And I was in the room when they presented the campaign results. The executive director actually got emotional talking about the response rate. They talked then, easily and naturally, about the Foundation's work, about the challenges of messaging for nonprofits, about the tech startup scene, and how marketing strategy had evolved in the age of social media saturation. Daniel asked questions that showed he was actually listening, not just waiting for his turn to speak. He challenged some of her assumptions about venture capital with good humor and solid arguments. He laughed at her observations about the sometimes absurd world of corporate marketing. Vanessa realized with something like surprise that she was enjoying herself, that for the first time in weeks, she wasn't performing a version of herself or maintaining a defensive facade. She was just talking, being. The announcement for dinner interrupted their conversation. Daniel glanced toward the tables and then back at her. "I'm supposed to be at table 7, he said. "Board member seating. But if you're not committed to a particular table, I could probably arrange for you to join us. Fair warning, there will be speeches and appeals for donations, but the company's generally good." Vanessa checked her program. She'd been assigned to table 12, likely with other staff from her firm and their guests. Safe, predictable, easy. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. Daniel's smile reached his eyes. "Excellent. Follow me." Nastawantasam Part 3. The collision table 7 was positioned near the front of the room, close enough to the stage to show respect, but not so close as to be uncomfortable when the speeches started. Daniel introduced Vanessa to the others already seated. A retired judge and his wife who funded the Foundation's legal literacy program, a tech CEO who'd made her fortune in cybersecurity and now focused on getting girls into STEM fields, and an older gentleman who Daniel explained in a whisper had been the Foundation's founding donor 40 years ago. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from the Foundation's upcoming expansion to debates about the most effective models for educational intervention to someone's recent safari in Tanzania. Vanessa found herself relaxing into the evening, contributing observations when she had something to add, listening with genuine interest when she didn't. The first course arrived, a delicate butternut squash soup with sage oil, and Vanessa was raising her spoon when she felt it. That particular prickling sensation at the back of her neck that comes from being watched. She looked up and scanned the room with practiced casualness, not wanting to appear paranoid but unable to ignore the feeling. And there he was, Marcus, 3 tables away, near the back of the room, wearing the charcoal gray suit she'd helped him pick out for his cousin's wedding. His hair was styled differently, shorter on the sides, a deliberate messiness on top that probably required expensive product. He was holding a glass of wine and talking to a blonde woman in a red dress who had her hand on his arm with possessive familiarity. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and Vanessa watched several emotions flicker across his face in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been smugness, and then a settling into calculated interest. He said something to the blonde woman, probably an excuse, and began making his way through the tables toward her. Vanessa's first instinct was to look away, to pretend she hadn't seen him, to focus intensely on her soup and hope he'd change course. But she didn't. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds and then returned her attention to the table, to the conversation about educational metrics that the judge was passionately explaining. She felt rather than saw Marcus arrive at their table. "Vanessa?" His voice carried that particular blend of surprise and entitlement that had characterized too many of their interactions. "I didn't expect to see you here." She looked up with deliberate slowness, as if she'd only just noticed him standing there. "Marcus? Hello." The table had gone quiet, that particular kind of attentive silence that meant everyone was suddenly very interested in their soup while listening to every word. "You look different," Marcus said, his eyes traveling over her dress in a way that made her skin crawl with familiarity. "Good. Really good. Thank you. Vanessa's voice was polite. Nothing more. The voice she'd use with a distant acquaintance or a colleague she didn't particularly like. Marcus seemed to expect more. When she simply returned to her conversation with the judge about literacy program outcomes, he shifted his weight, clearly not ready to be dismissed. I didn't know you knew people at this level of the foundation, he said, gesturing vaguely at the table. I'm here with Brittany. She works in development for the Children's Hospital, but I'm surprised to see you here. The implication was clear. This wasn't her world, her crowd, her level of social access. Vanessa felt Daniel shift slightly beside her, a subtle change in posture that suggested heightened attention. She set down her soup spoon with careful precision. I worked with the foundation on their spring campaign, she said simply. This is a thank you invitation. Oh, right. Your job. Marcus's smile had an edge to it now. I keep forgetting you're all about the work these days. It was a familiar dig, one he'd deployed dozens of times when they were together. The suggestion that her career focus was somehow excessive, that her ambition was a character flaw rather than a strength. Before Vanessa could respond, Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice pleasant but carrying an undertone of something harder. I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met. Daniel Morrison. He extended his hand toward Marcus with a kind of polite formality that was somehow also a challenge. Marcus shook his hand, and Vanessa watched him process the name. She could see the moment recognition hit. Daniel Morrison was a name that appeared in tech journals and business publications. A venture capitalist with enough influence that even people outside his industry knew who he was. Marcus Webb, he said, recovering his smile. I'm an old friend of Vanessa's. Friend? Vanessa repeated quietly, tasting the word. Not exactly a lie, but not exactly the truth either. The coward's choice of descriptor. We dated, Marcus clarified, apparently deciding that establishing his prior claim was important. Recently, actually. Then I see, Daniel said, his tone utterly neutral. An awkward silence settled over the table. The judge's wife suddenly became very interested in her water glass. The tech CEO checked her phone with exaggerated focus. Marcus seemed to realize he'd lost control of the interaction, but wasn't quite ready to retreat. He gestured back toward his own table. Well, I should get back. Brittany's probably wondering where I went. But it was good to see you, Vanessa, really. You look happy. He said it like he didn't quite believe it. Like her happiness in his absence was somehow unexpected, or even slightly offensive. Thank you, Vanessa said again, her voice still scrupulously polite. Enjoy your evening. Marcus hesitated as if waiting for something more. An invitation to catch up later. A sign that she was affected by his presence? When neither came, he nodded stiffly and walked away, his shoulders just slightly too rigid to suggest complete comfort. Vanessa picked up her soup spoon and took a bite, forcing herself to chew and swallow normally, despite the fact that her heart was racing and her hands wanted to shake. Well, the judge's wife said after a moment, her voice warm with understanding. That was certainly a thing that happened. The table laughed, the tension breaking and conversation resumed. But Vanessa felt Daniel's eyes on her, a question in his gaze that he was too polite to voice in front of others. The meal continued through courses of citrus glazed salmon and roasted vegetables, followed by a perfectly executed chocolate torte. There were speeches, as promised, moving testimonials from scholarship recipients, appeals for continued support, recognition of major donors. Vanessa applauded at the appropriate moments and found herself genuinely moved by the stories of young people whose lives had been transformed by educational access. But she was hyper-aware of Marcus's presence 3 tables away. She could feel him watching her, could sense his confusion and possibly his irritation. The woman in red, Brittany, seemed to be trying to regain his attention, but his focus kept drifting back toward Vanessa's table. After the speeches concluded and coffee was being served, Daniel leaned slightly toward her. Would you like to get some air? He asked quietly. The terrace is usually less crowded than the bar. Vanessa nodded gratefully. They excused themselves from the table and made their way through the ballroom to a set of French doors that opened onto a stone terrace overlooking the city. A few other guests had had the same idea, but the space was large enough that they could find a quiet corner near the railing. The night air was cool against Vanessa's bare shoulders, carrying the faint scent of rain that might arrive by morning. City lights sparkled below them, and the sounds of traffic and distant sirens created an urban symphony that somehow felt peaceful. "You okay?" Daniel asked after a moment. "Yes." Vanessa was surprised to find it was true. "Actually, yes. I thought seeing him would be, I don't know, worse." "How long has it been?" 3 weeks since he left. We were together for 2 years before that." She paused, debating how much to share. It wasn't a kind ending. They rarely are. Vanessa looked at him. "Voice of experience?" "Divorced 7 years ago," Daniel admitted. "Amicable mostly, but still not easy. Marriage is complicated. Ending one is more complicated." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Vanessa found herself saying, "He told me nobody would want me," right before he left. That was the last thing he said. She wasn't sure why she was sharing this with a man she'd known for barely 3 hours. Maybe because he was essentially a stranger, someone with no investment in her past or her pain. Maybe because the champagne had lowered her usual defenses, or maybe because she was tired of carrying it alone. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful in the reflected light from the ballroom. "That's a particular kind of cruelty," he said finally. "The kind designed to echo, to make you doubt yourself long after he's gone." "It worked," Vanessa admitted. "For a while. Maybe it's still working." "Is it?" Daniel turned to face her fully. "Because from where I'm standing, I see a woman who got invited to a prestigious event because of her professional excellence, who showed up alone rather than hiding at home, who's wearing a dress that looks like it was designed specifically for her, and who's been charming a table full of people who regularly write 6-figure checks and don't suffer fools. That doesn't look like someone nobody wants. That looks like someone who's selective about who she allows in." Vanessa felt something shift in her chest, like a knot she hadn't realized was there suddenly loosening. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'm not being charitable," Daniel replied. "I'm being observational. There's a difference." Before Vanessa could respond, the French doors opened and Marcus stepped onto the terrace. Of course, because the universe apparently had a sense of dramatic timing. He spotted them immediately and walked over with the kind of determined purpose that suggested liquid courage and poor judgment. "Vanessa, can we talk?" He glanced at Daniel with barely concealed irritation. "Privately?" "We're actually in the middle of a conversation," Vanessa said evenly. "It'll just take a minute." Marcus's tone had shifted into the wheedling quality she remembered from their worst arguments. "Please." Vanessa looked at Daniel, who gave a small nod. "I'll give you 2 a moment. I should check in with the executive director anyway." He touched her arm briefly, a gesture of support rather than possession, and walked back into the ballroom. She turned to Marcus, waiting. After 2 years together, she'd learned that silence was often her most effective tool against his need to control conversations. "So," Marcus started, then seemed to lose his train of thought. "You and Morrison, huh? That's fast." We're having a conversation at a charity event," Vanessa said. "Not exactly a scandalous development." "Come on, Vanessa. I saw how he was looking at you, how you were looking at him. How was I looking at him?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Like he matters, like you're interested. And that bothers you because..." She kept her voice genuinely curious, not confrontational. "Because it's been 3 weeks. You're already moving on?" Vanessa studied him, the familiar face now somehow foreign, the body language she'd once found attractive now, just aggressive and insecure. "You left me, Marcus. You told me nobody would want me. And you walked out. You don't get to be upset about how I'm handling that." "I didn't mean..." He ran his hand through his styled hair, disrupting its careful arrangement. "Look, I said things I shouldn't have said. I was angry. We were both angry." "I wasn't angry," Vanessa corrected gently. "I was hurt. There's a difference." "Fine. Whatever. But this..." He gestured back toward the ballroom, toward where Daniel had disappeared. "This is you trying to prove something. To yourself or to me, I don't know. But it's not real." And there it was. The need to diminish, to control the narrative, to ensure that even her reactions to his choices somehow reflected poorly on her, rather than him. Vanessa felt something crystallize inside her, a clarity that had been building since she'd opened the invitation, since she'd bought the dress, since she'd walked into this ballroom alone and discovered she was more than capable of existing without him. You know what, Marcus? You're right about one thing. I am proving something. She stepped closer, close enough that he had to actually look at her, really see her. I'm proving that I don't need your validation, that I don't need you to tell me I'm worth wanting, that your opinion of me matters exactly as much as I allow it to matter. Vanessa, I'm not done. Her voice was quiet but firm. For 2 years I made myself smaller. I apologized for working late. I downplayed my achievements. I pretended your insecurities were my responsibility to manage. And when you left, when you threw that final little knife on your way out, part of me believed it. Part of me thought maybe you were right. Marcus opened his mouth, but she raised her hand. But here's what I've learned in 3 weeks. Your limitations are not my reality. Your fear that nobody would want me says everything about how you see relationships and nothing about who I actually am. And honestly, the fact that you're here, interrupting my evening, unable to handle seeing me happy without you, that just proves how little you actually understood about what we had. She took a breath, feeling lighter than she had in months. I hope you and Brittany are very happy together. I mean that. But I'm done letting you define my worth or my future. So please, go back to your table. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and let me enjoy mine. Marcos stared at her, his expression cycling through anger, confusion, and something that might have been regret. But Vanessa didn't wait to interpret it further. She walked past him, back through the French doors, and into the ballroom where the sounds of conversation and laughter wrapped around her like a welcome. Part 4. The truth that always was. Vanessa found Daniel near the bar, engaged in conversation with the foundation's executive director. When he saw her, he excused himself smoothly and met her halfway. You okay? He asked again, and she realized it was a question he seemed genuinely invested in, not just polite noise. Very okay, she said, and was startled to feel tears prickling at her eyes. Happy tears. Release tears. Tears that came from finally setting down a weight she'd been carrying for too long. Dance with me, Daniel offered his hand. The string quartet had been replaced by a small jazz ensemble, and several couples were already swaying on the makeshift dance floor near the stage. Vanessa let Daniel lead her into the crowd, his hand settling at her waist with a kind of respectful certainty that felt like safety rather than control. They moved together easily, neither of them particularly skilled dancers, but both competent enough to navigate the floor without incident. Vanessa rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of his cologne, something woodsy and subtle that didn't announce itself. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For being kind, for not making assumptions, for seeing me. Daniel was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that made her lift her head to look at him. I should probably tell you something. Vanessa's stomach tightened slightly. Here it comes, she thought. The complication. The revelation that this evening had been too good to be true. I knew who you were before tonight, Daniel said. I mean, I knew your name. I've been following your work for about 6 months. Vanessa pulled back slightly. What? The foundation campaign wasn't your first excellent work. You did that series for the Environmental Coalition last fall, the one about ocean plastics told through the stories of coastal communities. That was remarkable. And before that, the rebranding for the Women's Shelter Network. I pay attention to good work, and yours is consistently exceptional. So when I introduced myself tonight, I already knew exactly who you were. Daniel smiled, a bit sheepishly. I probably should have led with that, but I didn't want to seem like a stalker. And then the conversation was so easy that it felt weird to interrupt with, oh, by the way, I've been professionally admiring you from afar. Vanessa processed this information, trying to decide how she felt about it. That's intense. I know. I'm sorry if it makes you uncomfortable, but I believe in transparency, and it felt dishonest to let the evening end without you knowing. They'd stopped dancing, still holding each other but motionless in the middle of the floor while couples swirled around them. "When you said you weren't in acquisition mode tonight," Vanessa started, "I meant it. I'm not trying to recruit you or pitch you on some startup that needs marketing expertise. I just wanted to meet you, to have a conversation with the person behind work I admire." He paused. "And yes, I was hoping you'd be as interesting as your work suggested, which you are. Significantly more so, actually. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. We can finish this dance, you can go home, and that can be the end of it. Or," he trailed off, leaving the alternative unspoken but present between them. "Or," Vanessa prompted, "or you could let me take you to dinner next week. Somewhere quiet where we can actually talk without speeches and charity auctions. No agenda except getting to know each other better." Vanessa looked up at him. This man who'd appeared in her evening like a character from a story she hadn't known she was writing. Who'd been kind to her without knowing her past. Who'd defended her without being asked. Who'd been present in a way that Marcus never had, even when they'd been together. "I'd like that," she said. Daniel's smile was genuine and warm. "Yeah? Yeah." They resumed dancing, and Vanessa felt something settle in her chest. Not the desperate validation of being chosen, but the quiet confidence of choosing for herself. The music shifted into something slower, and the lights dimmed slightly. Through the crowd, Vanessa caught a glimpse of Marcus standing near his table, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Brittany was beside him, talking animatedly about something, her hand on his arm, but his attention was fixed on Vanessa and Daniel. A few weeks ago, maybe even a few hours ago, that would have mattered to her. The knowledge that he was seeing her happy, seeing her desired by someone else, seeing her thrive in his absence. She might have leaned into Daniel more, laughed a little louder, performed her contentment for an audience of one. But now she realized she genuinely didn't care. Marcus's opinion of her life had exactly as much weight as she gave it, and she was giving it none. As if sensing her thoughts, Daniel spoke quietly near her ear. "He's watching you, isn't he?" "Probably. Does it matter?" "No," Vanessa said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. Not even a little bit. The song ended, and they pulled apart slightly. The evening was winding down now. People were beginning to make their exits, thanking hosts and collecting coats. "I should probably head out," Vanessa said reluctantly. "Early meeting tomorrow. Let me walk you to valet." They collected her small clutch from the table, saying goodbye to the judge and his wife, the tech CEO who pressed a business card into Vanessa's hand and told her to call about a potential consulting project. The older donor who'd founded the foundation shook both their hands and made a comment about young people giving him hope for the future. Outside, the night had grown colder, and the threatened rain had begun as a fine mist. Daniel shrugged off his tuxedo jacket and draped it over Vanessa's shoulders without asking, a gesture so casually considerate that it made her chest ache a little. They stood under the awning while the valet went to retrieve her car, the silence between them comfortable and full of possibility. "So," Daniel said, "dinner next week. How's Wednesday?" "Wednesday works. I'll text you. We exchanged numbers, right?" He pulled out his phone. "We didn't, actually. They remedied that. Thumbs flying over screens, new contact information saved and secured." Vanessa's car appeared at the curb, her practical Honda Accord that had seen her through grad school and early career struggles, that still ran perfectly well, despite Marcus's hints that someone at her level should drive something more impressive. Before she could move toward it, she heard her name called. Marcus was walking toward them from the hotel entrance, having apparently followed them out. Brittany was nowhere to be seen. "Vanessa, wait. Please." Daniel looked at her questioningly, and she gave a small nod. This was something she needed to finish, to close completely. "What, Marcus?" He stopped a few feet away, hands shoved in his pockets, his expensive suit rumpled now from the long evening. "I just wanted to say..." He glanced at Daniel, clearly uncomfortable with the audience, but pushed forward anyway. "I was wrong about what I said. You were right in there. I was projecting my own insecurities, and I'm sorry." It was possibly the most mature thing she'd ever heard him say. "I appreciate that," Vanessa said carefully. I just thought you should know that I didn't mean it. That you're actually pretty great. And whoever ends up with you is lucky. It was a conditional compliment. A backhanded validation that still positioned him as the arbiter of her worth. A few hours ago, she might have accepted it as the best she could expect from him. Now she saw it clearly for what it was. Before she could respond, Daniel stepped forward slightly, his voice pleasant, but carrying an edge of steel. She's not difficult to appreciate when you're not intimidated by her competence, he said directly to Marcus. She's not demanding when you're not threatened by her standards. She's exactly as she should be. And if that was somehow a problem for you, that says everything about your capacity and nothing about hers. Marcus's jaw tightened. I was talking to Vanessa, and now I'm talking to you. Daniel's voice didn't rise, but something in his tone made Marcus take an involuntary step back. She's already told you everything you need to hear. That conversation is over. For a long moment, Marcus looked like he might argue, but something in Daniel's calm certainty seemed to deflate his remaining bravado. He nodded stiffly, looked at Vanessa one last time, possibly searching for some sign that she disagreed, that she wanted him to stay and fight for her, and found only polite disinterest. Right, Marcus said finally. Well, goodbye, Vanessa. Goodbye, Marcus. He walked back into the hotel, and Vanessa watched him go with a sense of finality that felt like freedom. The valet was holding her car door open, clearly trying to be patient, but also aware that there was a line forming behind her vehicle. Thank you, Vanessa said to Daniel, slipping his jacket off her shoulders and handing it back. For tonight, for all of it. Daniel took the jacket but caught her hand before she could fully pull away. His thumb traced a gentle circle on her palm. Vanessa. He waited until she met his eyes. Just so we're clear, I didn't come to your defense tonight because I thought you needed defending. No? No. You'd already handled him perfectly well on your own. I stepped in because I wanted to. Because what he said was offensive on a fundamental level, and I couldn't let it stand unchallenged. He paused. You don't need anyone to fight your battles. But that doesn't mean you have to fight them alone. Something in Vanessa's chest cracked open, not breaking but unfurling, like a flower that had been closed against winter finally allowing itself to bloom. Wednesday, she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening again. Don't forget. Wouldn't dream of it. She got into her car, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. In her rearview mirror, she could see Daniel standing under the awning, watching her leave with his jacket draped over his arm, and a small smile on his face. Vanessa drove through the quiet city streets, the radio off, content with the sound of rain beginning to fall in earnest against the windshield. When she got home, she hung the emerald dress carefully in her closet, placed her grandmother's earrings back in their box, and washed her face clean of makeup. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, just Vanessa now, no dress or styling to enhance her, and saw someone she recognized. Someone strong, someone valuable, someone who'd learned that being wanted wasn't the same as being worthy, and that her worth had never been dependent on someone else's ability to see it. Her phone buzzed with a text. Daniel, made it home okay? Sleep well. Looking forward to Wednesday. She smiled and typed back, home safe. Me too. But before she could set down her phone, another message came through. Daniel, one more thing. I probably should have said this earlier, but the evening got away from me. Vanessa waited, watching the 3 dots that indicated he was still typing. Daniel, I didn't arrive tonight hoping to meet you. I've known you were going to be there for 3 weeks. I saw your name on the guest list and confirmed you'd RSVP'd before I finalized my own attendance. I know that might sound intense, but I wanted you to know. This wasn't chance. I chose to be there because you were going to be there. Vanessa stared at the message, her heart beating faster. She typed, Why are you telling me this? The response came quickly. Daniel, because you spent 2 years with someone who made you feel like you had to earn the right to be wanted. And I need you to understand. Some of us have been watching you shine from the beginning. Some of us didn't need you to prove anything. You were already more than enough. Exactly as you were. Vanessa sat down on the edge of her bed, phone clutched in her hand, and let the tears come fully now. They weren't tears of sadness or even relief. They were tears of recognition, of coming home to herself after a long absence, of understanding that Marcus's 7 words had only ever had the power she'd given them, and she was taking that power back. She typed carefully, "I don't know what to do with that information. Daniel, you don't have to do anything with it, just know it's true. Sleep well, Vanessa. I'll see you Wednesday." She set down her phone and lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling with a smile playing at her lips. Nobody's going to want you. The words still echoed, but now they sounded different. Now they sounded like what they'd always been. One man's fear disguised as prophecy. One person's limitation masquerading as universal truth. And in the space where those words had lived for 3 weeks, something new was growing. Not the desperate relief of being chosen by someone else, but the quiet power of choosing herself. And maybe, just maybe, allowing someone else who'd already chosen her to walk alongside. Wednesday, she thought. Wednesday would be interesting. She turned off the light and settled into sleep. And for the first time in weeks, the darkness was simply darkness, empty of poison, full of possibility. 3 months later, Vanessa walked into the coffee shop where she'd agreed to meet Jessica for their monthly catch-up. Her friend was already there, commandeering a corner table and nursing what was probably her 3rd espresso of the morning, if the cups stacked nearby were any indication. "There she is," Jessica announced as Vanessa approached. "The woman who disappeared into happiness and forgot her best friend existed." "I saw you 2 weeks ago," Vanessa laughed, sliding into the seat across from her. "That was business lunch. This is friend time, different category entirely." Jessica studied her with a kind of scrutiny that came from 15 years of friendship. "You look disgustingly happy. It's annoying." "I'm not—" Vanessa started to protest, then stopped. "Okay, I am pretty happy. Daniel treating you well?" "Very well." "And by that you mean—" Vanessa smiled into her latte. "He remembers things I mention in passing. He asks about my work with genuine interest. He actually listens when I talk instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. He's introduced me to his friends. He's met mine. He makes me laugh. He challenges me intellectually. Okay, I get it. He's perfect and you're sickening together." But Jessica was smiling. The kind of genuine happiness that came from seeing someone you loved finally being treated well. "I'm happy for you, V. Really. Thanks." Vanessa paused. "I know it's only been 3 months, but it feels different than it did with Marcus," Jessica finished. "I know. I can see it." "How?" "You're not apologizing for taking up space anymore. You're not second-guessing every professional decision. You're not minimizing your achievements or downplaying your success. You're just you. The you I remember from before you started dating Marcus." Vanessa hadn't thought about it that way, but Jessica was right. She'd reclaimed parts of herself she hadn't even realized she'd surrendered. The confidence in her own judgment, the willingness to prioritize her needs, the comfort with being alone when she chose to be. "Did I tell you Marcus emailed me last week?" Vanessa asked. Jessica's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, this should be good. He wanted to let me know that he and Brittany broke up. Apparently, she was too focused on her career." Vanessa made air quotes around the last part. The irony is truly stunning. Right? And then, this is the best part. He asked if I'd be willing to meet for coffee to catch up and maybe talk about things. Please tell me you declined in the most devastating way possible. Vanessa shook her head. "I didn't decline at all. I just didn't respond. Because honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. His attempts to rewrite our history or re-establish contact have nothing to do with me and everything to do with his own narrative about himself. That's very mature of you." "Daniel's therapist is very good," Vanessa admitted. "He suggested I see someone too, just to process everything. It's been helpful." Wow. A man who not only goes to therapy himself, but suggests his partner might benefit from it too? Are you sure he's real, and not some kind of elaborate wish-fulfillment hallucination? They laughed together. The easy laughter of old friends who'd seen each other through terrible boyfriends and career setbacks and family drama and every other challenge life had thrown at them. "So what happens now?" Jessica asked after they'd ordered more coffee and split a truly indulgent chocolate croissant. "You and Daniel, I mean. Is this heading somewhere?" Vanessa considered the question. I don't know. We're not in a rush to define anything or hit specific milestones. We're just being together, seeing where it goes. And that's enough for you? After 2 years of Marcus and his constant need to control the narrative? It's more than enough, Vanessa said firmly. Because it's real. It's based on who we actually are rather than who we're trying to prove we are. And if it ends tomorrow, I'll be sad. But I won't be shattered. Because I'm not building my sense of self on someone else's perception of me anymore. Jessica raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. To growth. And to never settling for men who make us feel like we have to earn the right to be loved. To never settling, Vanessa echoed, clinking her cup against Jessica's. They talked for another hour about Jessica's own dating adventures, about office politics at Vanessa's firm, about their college roommate who was pregnant with twins and terrified, about everything and nothing that mattered between friends. When they finally parted ways on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop, Jessica pulled Vanessa into a fierce hug. I'm proud of you, she said quietly, for walking away from what was hurting you, for showing up at that gala alone, for choosing yourself. Thanks for being there when I needed you, Vanessa replied. Always. Vanessa walked to her car with a lightness in her step that had become her default state these days. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Finished my meetings early. Want to grab dinner tonight? I'm thinking that Thai place you mentioned. She smiled and typed back, perfect. Meet you there at 7. As she drove through the city toward her next appointment, a client meeting that could potentially lead to a significant account, Vanessa thought about the journey from Marcus's departing words to this moment. Nobody's going to want you. The prophecy had failed spectacularly, not because Daniel had appeared to prove it wrong, but because she'd discovered it had never been true in the first place. She'd always been wanted. She'd always been enough. She'd just been giving the wrong person the power to convince her otherwise. And now, finally, she was free. Not because someone else had rescued her or validated her worth, but because she'd done the hardest work of all. She'd chosen to believe in herself, even when it would have been easier to accept someone else's diminished version of who she was. That evening, sitting across from Daniel at the Thai restaurant with curry and spring rolls spread between them, Vanessa listened to him talk about his day with genuine interest and shared details of her own. They debated the merits of different marketing strategies. They laughed about a ridiculous reality show they'd both been hate-watching. They made plans for the weekend and discussed maybe taking a trip together in the fall. It was ordinary. It was peaceful. It was real. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Vanessa wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop or analyzing every word for hidden criticism or performing a version of herself designed to be acceptable. She was just being, and being was enough. Later that night, walking back to her car with Daniel beside her, their fingers loosely intertwined, she thought about the woman who'd stood in her apartment 3 months ago, watching Marcus walk out the door with his poison still echoing in the air. She wished she could tell that woman what she knew now, that the words would lose their power, that happiness wasn't about proving anyone wrong, that the right person wouldn't make you feel like you had to earn their attention. But that woman had needed to learn those lessons for herself, just as Vanessa had needed to walk through the fire of doubt and come out the other side still standing. What are you thinking about? Daniel asked, squeezing her hand gently. Vanessa looked up at him. This man who'd seen her from the beginning, who'd waited patiently for their paths to cross, who treated her presence in his life like the gift it was, rather than a favor he was granting. I'm thinking, she said honestly, that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. He smiled and kissed her forehead, a gesture of affection without possession. Me too, he said simply. And in that moment, under the city lights with the sounds of traffic and life swirling around them, Vanessa understood the most important truth of all. She hadn't needed someone to want her to prove her worth. She'd needed to know her worth so completely that she could recognize when someone truly saw her and choose to let them in. Not as validation, not as rescue, but as partnership between equals who'd each done the work of becoming whole on their own. That was the real victory. Not proving Marcus wrong, but proving herself right. And that was a power nobody could ever take away.